Hello everybody and welcome to another video. So this is going to be another video in my game design series, which I've decided to formalize a little bit and call it Game Theory. So this one is on Rule Zero and the importance of change. So if you've played games, any kind of games where you have some kind of authorial control, probably RPGs, but you're going to see that this is all interconnected. You'll be familiar with Rule Zero. For the rest of you, come along with me on this little journey of what I think is the single most important rule. In fact, it might be the only rule in games that actually matters. And it's certainly one that has had more impact than any other single rule that's ever been written. So, let's take a look. Alright, so let's start out. What is Rule Zero? Well, Rule Zero is named, ironically it got its name about 25 years after it was actually created. For the longest time it was just a concept. It got its name Rule Zero in the 3rd edition of Dungeons & Dragons. And as you can see, there is a sort of list of rules. And in it, there was one that was just numbered 0. Meaning it happened before all the other rules, and this is actually the text out of the book. And you can see basically that your DM will have house rules or campaign standards that vary from standard rules. They're basically okay to do that. That's what this is. It's basically a rule that says your DM has ultimate authorial control over these rules. Don't take anything in this book as dictum, right? Your DM has power to change things, so you're going to want to talk to them. Now, this is the 3rd edition incarnation of this rule, but it exists going all the way back to the very beginning, and we're going to look at a couple different interpretations of it. The interesting thing to me about Rule Zero is that what exactly it allows the DM of a game to do is somewhat controversial. And by that what I mean is that some people read this as your DM has ultimate power. Their word is law. They can change any and everything in this book however they want, anytime they want, for any reason they want. And probably that's a reading of the rule. And then there are other people who just read it as the GM is allowed to empower things that have, is empowered to basically create fun. If a rule would conflict with fun, or would conflict with common sense, or the verisimilitude of the world, or whatever, then they have the authority to change it in that case. But they're still expected to be a good actor in the situation. To act with good faith, that is to say. I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle of all of that. But this itself, what's ironic is that itself has been interpreted through the many different writers of the game. Because as I said, even though the thing got its name, Rule Zero, in 2000, it had been around for 25 years beforehand. So the one that I really like is from David Zeb Cook, who's a fantastic game designer and author, and has written many, many great things over the years. But this one is a nice little particular quote here. Don't just let the game sit there, and don't become a rules lawyer worrying about each piddly little detail. If you can't figure out the answer, make it up. And all emphasis is his, by the way. I did not capitalize anything here. This is directly from the book. And whatever you do, don't fall into the trap of believing these rules are complete. I love everything about this paragraph. This is so wonderful and so insightful and literally exactly the way I view games and all games. And right now we're talking about RPGs, but we're going to go broader than that as we go forward. The idea that the rules, as they're written, are some kind of dictum, that we're dealing with legal documents wherein I have to follow the letter of the law, is nonsense to me. This is a game, and we should never worry about, as Zeb says here, each piddly little detail. I love that that his point of view is to empower the GM to just make things up. And that last sentence is so powerful. Don't fall into the trap of believing these rules are complete. Though David was referencing 2nd edition Dungeons & Dragons here, as you can see, this comes from the foreword of the DM's Guide. This is such an important lesson to internalize about every game ever. And one of the major things that I often see when people argue on forums and everywhere else about the rules is because they don't understand this basic point, that the rules are not complete. They're never going to be complete. Any game is attempting to simulate, to some degree or another, reality. Now, how much it's trying to simulate reality, there's a very wide spectrum there. But it is a game. It is trying to gamify something. And in any game of significant complexity, there will be situations that fall outside of what the game can account for in the rules. Rules will never be complete. Moreover, if they were, they would be terrible. Because laws are never complete. How often must judges invoke their own, like laws, in the real world, laws? How often must judges invoke their own discretion because of the complexities of a situation? And laws are massive, long, insanely detailed, chapter 5, subsection 3C, blah, 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 with all this legalese. And those aren't complete. So why would you think a rulebook, even a massive rulebook, would ever be complete? It's nonsense. It can't be the case. And so, as a result, there will always be confusion. In the case of a game with a judge, such as an RPG, right, it becomes easy to solve. They get empowered through this version of Rule Zero, whatever it is. And they then can make a call about what the rules, what the best interpretation would be, not only according to the rules, but according to that game and that moment and that narrative and that whatever, right? And the decision is made, and you get back to doing what's important. Playing the game, not arguing about rules. And that's why Rule Zero is so important, especially in terms of RPGs. But as we go on, I'm going to say that this is actually not the most important reason for Rule Zero's existence. I think this is sort of the necessity of it. That's what I'll say. It's the oil in the engine, right? It keeps everything running smoothly. Without it, you'd get friction, things would grind, people get hung up on rules disputes. This is oil that keeps everything, all the pistons firing smoothly. So, but I think there's actually a much deeper and valuable point to these sets of rules. To Rule Zero and its purpose in a set of rules. And I'm going to get to that on the next slide. Okay, so what's the real reason? We know that it creates oil in the engine. It keeps things moving smoothly, allows you to resolve disputes, which is certainly valuable. But I don't think that's actually the real value of it. I think that's sort of the surface, it's the easy, low-hanging fruit. But I think there's a much deeper story here. And to find that story, we're going to go back, way back, to 1975. This is a quote from Gary Gygax in the sort of Zero Edition chainmail, whatnot, of D&D, or whatever you want to think of it as at that time. The proto-D&D, I guess. And I'm going to read this text verbatim because I think it's useful. These rules are as complete as possible within the limitations imposed by the space of 3 booklets. That is, they cover the major aspects of fantasy campaigns, but still remain flexible. As with any other set of miniatures rules, emphasis mine, they are guidelines to follow in designing your own fantastic medieval campaign. This is a meteoric strike of insight. This is the level of brilliance that would make Gary Gygax such a luminary in the game design field and in the history of tabletop gaming. Because Gary realized, perhaps more than anyone else, and he codified it here in this rule, that the game is by its nature incomplete, and always will be. Because what the game contains is only the start. It's only going to ever be the framework. And at a deeper level, that's what makes a game successful. If the game is the beginning and end, if the rules are all you can do, then the game is dying. Because the player will play it, the player will have the most possible experiences, and then they will be done. And as I mentioned, only the best of 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 the best games can survive centuries unchanged. Even years unchanged. Okay? That's a short list. That's, chess and Go and checkers and a few others. And even they still change here and there a little bit, or have new versions to play. You make speed chess or something else, right? But for the most part, games like this that are meaning to simulate larger things or be a bigger experience have to be flexible. They have to be a framework. The framework that allows you to insert your own design, your own tastes, your personality, and to explore the game in the way you want, because that keeps the game on your table for the years to come. That's what keeps the game interesting. And moreover, at the deepest level, that is what facilitates change. And change is what I'm going to talk about next, because I think that is what's most important. So, why really? Okay. Let's talk about why I think that last slide is so important. Because what this thing facilitates is change. It doesn't just allow you to be grease in the engine. It doesn't just allow you to create your own worlds and explore, but it creates change and keeps the experience fresh. This quote, again, is from Gary Gygax, and it's quite long. I'm sure you can read it while I'm talking. Gary Gygax has this wonderful prose. I love the way that he talks in his books. It is absolutely unduplicated throughout the history of gaming. His sort of method of speech, his tone and tenor that he took with his audience was absolutely fascinating and unique. At any rate, let's look down at the bottom where I have emphasized. As the author, I also realize that there are limits to my creativity and imagination. Others will think of things I didn't and devise things beyond my capability. That is at once both an incredibly humble statement and incredibly wise and insightful. He realizes that as the author, despite, as he mentions earlier, like playtesting and all of this stuff, discussion and play and questioning and personal insight, when he gives this over to the world, there are going to be people who have insights into the way that the game is or could be played, and that those are valuable, because it will create change in the play experience. And through that change, the game will continue to thrive. Because, and here is the most important thing, a static rule set is dying. Period. I don't care how good it is. There are a few exceptions. They are rare. And to be a static rule set, you must be one of the greatest games of all time. Chess, checkers, etc. Games that have lasted centuries. And very few games reach that bar. Okay? Very few, meaning like almost none. Like 0.001%, 0.000000001% of all games created reach that level. Because, and what I'm talking about here is both commercial success and its endurance at your table. A static set of rules will eventually be explored, and some part of a game's value is in exploration. When you, as a gamer, feel that you have experienced more or less everything the game has to offer, you will stop playing the game. Or at least most people will. Perhaps you are a person that's still playing the same game that you happen to find that you loved some random board game you found in 1976 that's never been updated, and you still get it out once a month and play it regularly. That's fine. I am not making a universal truth. I'm talking about in the aggregate. And in the aggregate, that game is dead, despite your love or enjoyment for it. Games survive through change, and the reality is no game designer, no game company can ever continue to support or produce change for the game forever. So the real value of this rule is that it allows you to do the job of the game designer. You know, back at the beginning of Age of Sigmar, when people were proposing a lot of house rules and changes, one of the questions asked was, why are you doing the job of the game company? Etc., something. This was a common sort of pushback I heard. Now, whatever you think of Age of Sigmar is fine. It's not cogent to this discussion. But the point of it is that no, that was wrong-headed pushback from the beginning. A set of rules of a game should have room for change, and you should be empowered, regardless of the type of game, to create your own rules and your own milieu to explore, because that's what's going to keep the game fresh. A game has to have that space in it to be successful in the long term, and to keep showing up on most people's tables. In the case of something like a competitive game where you need a lot of people to play it, you need a healthy meta, I think this is even more important, because it has to stay successful in a large version. Now, it also gets more dangerous, which we'll talk about later, because you have to find consensus. So there's a little bit more of a tightrope in competitive games than in something like a D&D or an RPG where you've got a judge-led cooperative game. All right, so let's look at the next slide. Let's move beyond RPGs. I mentioned that. Let's go back to the very first rule set for Magic the Gathering. This is 1994, the tiny little booklet you would get when you bought your little, starter box. Of course, we've got our Shivan Dragon there. Such a fantastic piece of art. I still love to this day. But about the rules. This was in there. This was one of my favorite little bits, and I remember this from back then. I won't read the whole thing again. I'll let you read it. But let's look at the highlighted text, because I feel that's what's the most important. These rules are a framework from which to start. After you know how to play, your play group may develop local rules, new ways to play, particular cards, or other variations. If both players agree, you can resolve the difference for the current game with a coin toss. So important. Everything we saw in the history of Rule 0, we're also seeing here, right? You can see, and Magic is certainly a competitive, judgeless game. I mean, I understand at a tournament there might be like a broader judge, but that's certainly the case even at, any tournament for Warhammer or anything else. In its simplest form, it is two players staring each other down. And I should also mention that this is an extremely competitive game in its initial implementation. You played for ante every game. Like, you had the potential to gain or lose a card from your collection of some value every single game. That was how this game was initially conceived. Now, ante quickly fell away, but it was there. So there is physical, not just pride on the line of winning or losing, as there is often with, like a game of Warhammer. I'm not betting my figs. Whereas every game of Magic in this rulebook, I'm supposed to put up one of my hard-earned cards that I paid money for that my opponent could walk away with. And yet, still this exists, right? If the players agree, then change things. Develop local rules. And it should be stated that this was critical to Magic's success, because there was so many interactions not mapped out that it took judge rulings and just coin flips and stuff like that, and it didn't matter. The game was hyper successful despite the mere skeletal nature of the rules. When I say hyper successful, I mean this went from not existing to being one of the biggest, most successful industries. This is more successful than RPGs. This is more successful than war games. Card games are, to this day, still one of the most massively successful markets of gaming. Okay? And it all kicked off with this tiny little book with its incomplete rules and this text telling you, yeah, we didn't cover everything. It's just a framework. Go ahead, knock yourself out. And the rules that people made here ended up becoming new ways to play. I've talked before about Commander, or as it originally was called, Elder Dragon Highlander, which was following this exact thing and eventually became a product that Wizards now sells and makes a ton of money off of and people love. That was just people taking this and going nuts. Building that change I talked about that kept the game fresh. Okay? It was so important to have this in the game because this is what led to new types of ways to play, and there were so many more, by the way. There were so many more. Some of which have become formal, some of which are still bouncing around as house rules. Doesn't matter. This was critical. This Rule Zero's implementation in card games. So it wasn't just RPGs. It also was a factor in these other games. Okay? Alright, but let's keep going. Let's look at some more. Let's talk about Warhammer. So I went back and dug through all my old Warhammer rulebooks. I have most of them going back a pretty fair distance. I like collecting all the old versions. And I went back and grabbed the 6th edition book because I felt because that was sort of it was the change into the more modern, streamlined, rules-heavy game. I think 6th and 5th were very, very different games. But nonetheless, there is still this section in the book on house rules. Warhammer lends itself to adaptation very well, and players should feel free to change, remove, or add the rules if they wish. Highlighted section now. Warhammer is supposed to be a broad set of game rules that hardened veterans can adapt, change, or add to as they please. Once again, we see the same text. The idea that what we have here is a framework to be adapted, changed, added, subtracted, whatever. As you please. Okay? No formal dictum from on high. This is meant to be a game that you change. And again, so the text on the right is the most newest incarnation. This is the most important rule. This text is taken directly from the Age of Sigmar 4-page rules. And once again, by the way, I want to highlight then you can get on with the fighting. Let us recall back to David Zeb Cook and his verbiage of solve the rules and get back to the game. Right? That was 1989, and what Zeb felt was most important was to solve the dispute quickly, in some simple way, make a call, make a change, and then move on back to the game. Here we now move forward to 2015, and we see the same exact concept. Here again, get rid of the dispute. Who cares? It's not relevant. Just solve the problem and get back to the game. So those are the things that I think, that's why I think Rule Zero is so important. Not only does it allow you to be, not only does it keep that oil in the engine that allows you to play the game, to have fun, but it creates this, this concept that the game isn't complete, and that's a good thing. The game not being complete means, yeah, use this as your framework. Use this as your starting point. And go from there. Right? Use this as a place to tell your own stories, to try your own rules, to have your own memorable experiences. Don't feel as though within this book is the beginning and end of this game's experience. And that is critical to the long-term success of the game because it allows the game to be dynamic, and it allows the game to suit different play styles, and it allows the game to keep being new for people, to try and explore new things. So, there you go. That's my talk on Rule Zero. I hope you now agree with me that it is, in fact, the most important rule of all games and game types, whatever the place is supposed to be. Even though it was concepted now 40 years ago in a little RPG / miniature rules game by Gary Gygax, it has come to dominate the modern way of thinking about game design, because it is an absolute essential quality, not just for smooth gameplay, but also for the success, the long-term success and enjoyment of the game. So thank you very much for watching, everybody. See you next time. I hope you appreciated this. We'll, of course, do more game design in the future, so if you want to see that, don't forget to like, subscribe, and of course, as always, the nicest thing you can do is share the video with another. I always really appreciate that. See you next time.